My name is Monica Hayes, and I'm doing well, all things considered. I live with my husband David in a cute suburb just outside of Chicago. He's a good man, steady, dependable, hardworking. We've been married for 8 years, and although we don't have children, we have a peaceful, comfortable life. But lately, I've been feeling a bit lost. It's like there's this other version of me, someone I don't recognize, and I can't help but wonder how I got there. It all started so subtly, like a quiet nudge in my mind. At first, I didn't actively pursue it. I didn't even understand it, but somehow curiosity grew. David and I had long since fallen into a routine. David got up at 6 a.m. every morning, had the same eggs and toast for breakfast, and then went to work at the accounting firm. He didn't say much when he got home, not because he was unfriendly, but because he was exhausted. He'd sit in the recliner, watch the evening news, and then fall asleep at 9 p.m. For years, I told myself that was enough. What I wanted was stability, a love that was repressed, but still love. At least that's what I thought. One day, while mindlessly browsing social media, I stumbled upon a blog post. It was just an article about how couples can reignite the spark in their relationship. But there was one sentence that caught my eye. Sometimes, curiosity about something you've never experienced can make your mind wander. I thought, hey, why not? Everyone gets curious about certain things, right? But this thought wouldn't go away. I started noticing things I'd never noticed before. The construction workers on the street, with their hearty laughter and broad shoulders. The barista at the coffee shop, who always seemed so confident. And the men at the gym, with their tan skin gleaming in the sweat, their laughter echoing through the otherwise dead space. I felt a bit silly, but I couldn't shake this feeling. I mean, I'm a grown woman, but I was still daydreaming like a schoolgirl. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. What would it be like? It wasn't just their appearance, but the vitality they exuded and the way they moved through the world with this unspoken confidence that captivated everyone. I told myself it was just harmless infatuation. Everyone has their own preferences, right? But this wasn't just about finding the right type. It was because they were so different from David, so different from everything I knew. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. It was a Tuesday. A month ago, I had joined a gym in the hope of doing something other than cleaning and cooking. David thought it was a good idea. Good for your health, he said. That day, as I was on the treadmill, I noticed them, two men standing near the weightlifting equipment. They were laughing about something, their deep, resonant voices filling the room. One of them, Marcus, had a smile that lit up the room. His skin was dark and deep, and his shoulders seemed to stretch into the distance. The other one was named Jamal. He was a bit taller and thinner, with prominent cheekbones and a piercing gaze that made my heart race. I tried not to look directly at him, but my eyes betrayed me. To my surprise, Marcus caught my gaze and smiled, saying, "You're doing great." He gestured toward the treadmill. I smiled nervously, not knowing how to respond. Jamal raised an eyebrow. "Well, it seems to me you're doing great," he said. My face felt warm and flushed. It was just casual conversation, but their warmth made me feel like I was basking in the sun after a long, cold winter. For weeks, I'd been looking forward to these encounters. They were friendly, that was all. Marcus would ask me about my workouts, and Jamal would crack a joke or two. It was simple, wasn't it? But deep down, I knew there was more to it. I knew that the way I hung around them, and the way my heart raced when they smiled at me, wasn't simple. Point one day, as I was leaving the gym, Marcus caught up with me in the parking lot. "Hey, Monica," he said in a soft, warm voice. I stopped in my tracks. "You remember my name?" he asked playfully. "Of course I do. I never forget a pretty face." The words hung in the air, charged with danger. I laughed, trying to lighten the mood, but my heart was beating faster than a racehorse. "Wouldn't it be nice to get a cup of coffee sometime?" he suggested, his eyes meeting mine. I should have said no. I should have laughed and walked away. Instead, I heard myself say, "Sure, why not?" As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt. David didn't deserve to be treated like this. He never hurt me, never gave me a reason to cheat. But I was curious, and I wanted to be noticed. That evening, David was sitting in his deck chair, totally unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I realized I had opened a door that I might never be able to close. The next day, I agreed to meet Marcus for coffee, waking up feeling guilty. I told myself not to go. What was I thinking? I was enjoying the attention, but meeting him outside the gym was a whole other ball game. But as the hours went by, I found myself growing more and more tempted. I found myself repeatedly reading Marcus's text, my mind going back and forth. "Meet you at 2 in the parking lot of the same gym." When 2 o'clock came, I found myself sitting in my car, driving to the gym. My heart was beating so fast I could feel it in my ears. When I arrived, I saw Marcus leaning against his sleek black sedan, a perfect match for his elegant demeanor. He smiled when he saw me, and I felt the air leave my lungs. "I'm glad you could make it," he said, opening the passenger door for me. I was a little nervous at first, but I took a deep breath and sat down. The car smelled of leather and cologne, a mixture that made my head spin. "Relax," he whispered, his voice soothing. "It's just coffee." But it wasn't, and we both knew it. The coffee shop was small and located in the part of town I didn't frequent very often. Marcus held the door open for me, and as we walked in together, I felt a strange mixture of excitement and shame. We found a quiet corner to sit, and I couldn't help but notice how intensely Marcus was staring at me. His gaze was firm, as if he were looking straight into my soul. "So, Monica," he said, leaning back in his chair, "tell me about yourself." I smiled nervously. "There's nothing to tell. I'm just a boring housewife." "Boring?" he asked playfully, raising an eyebrow. "I don't believe you," he said playfully. I gave a little shrug, trying to downplay the effect his attention was having on me. "Well, what about you? What do you do when you're not at the gym?" "I work at a real estate company," he said, smiling as his mouth curled up. "When I have time, I love to play basketball. It's a great way to stay out of trouble." I found myself smiling, and the tension between us eased slightly. We talked for an hour, maybe two. I shared things I'd never told anyone, not even David. I told him how lonely I sometimes felt, how my life had become a series of routines that didn't really mean anything. He listened intently, in a way I wasn't used to. When it was time to go, Marcus walked me to my car. "Thanks for coming," he said, his voice softer now. "I had a great time on our date," I added. I felt the same way, and I told him so. He came closer, and for a moment, I thought he might kiss me. I hold my breath, my heart racing, but he just smiles and takes a step back. "Have a safe trip home, Monica." Driving home, my mind races. I've crossed the line, but I can't bring myself to regret it and the days that followed. I was filled with guilt and anticipation. I immersed myself in my daily routine, trying to act normal around David, but Marcus's shadow kept popping up in my mind. A few days later, I saw him at the gym and everything seemed the same as always. He greeted me with a warm smile, but there was a playful intensity in his gaze. Jamal seemed to sense something, too. "You guys have been chatting a lot lately," he said teasingly. "Jealous?" Marcus just grinned and asked in return. Jamal shook his head and laughed. "Maybe." Then he turned to me. "Monica, Marcus is not the only interesting person." I felt my face flush and smiled awkwardly. "I'll keep that in mind." The joke was light-hearted, but it made me feel even more conflicted. Part of me wanted to end it while I was ahead, but another part, the part that had been dormant for so long, wanted to see where things would lead. A week later, Marcus invited me over to his place. "It's just a small gathering," he said. "Some friends' food. Nothing crazy." I told myself I was only agreeing out of politeness, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. As I stood in front of the mirror that night, carefully selecting a casual but flattering outfit, I could feel the excitement bubbling inside me. His apartment was in the city, a sleek and modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. There were only a few people there, most of them chatting and laughing in the living room. Marcus greeted me with a warm embrace. His hands lingered on my back for a moment that felt like a lifetime. "You look amazing," he said, and I replied, "Thank you." I tried to act casual. Jamal arrived shortly after, and his presence immediately energized the room. He greeted me with a warm smile, and I felt his gaze on me for a long time. The evening went by in a blur of laughter, music, and glances shared between us. I felt like a different person, like the one I had forgotten. But as the night was coming to an end, I realized what I was doing. Marcus offered to walk me to my car, and I found myself alone with him again. "You're full of surprises, Monica," he said, staring into my eyes. "What do you mean?" I asked, quietly. He came closer, and his hand touched mine. "I mean, you're not as boring as you think you are." Before I could respond, he leaned in and kissed me. At first, it was gentle and tentative, but it soon deepened, and I felt myself surrender to it. When we finally parted, I was still a little breathless. "I should go," I said, my voice trembling. He nodded, his expression inscrutable. "Good night, Monica." As I drove home, tears streamed down my face. I had crossed a line from which there was no return. For the next few weeks, there was an endless tug-of-war going on inside me. I knew what I had done and that there was no going back. The kiss with Marcus had left me feeling more unsettled than I could have ever imagined. I tried to see it as a mistake, a moment of weakness, but it was more than just a kiss. It was the beginning of everything, and every glance, every touch, Every smile drew me deeper and deeper into it. David never noticed, or maybe he just didn't want to. He kept up his daily routine, following the rules. He was a devoted husband who loved his family, coming home at 6 o'clock, having dinner, sitting in his chair, watching TV, and then falling asleep. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. He was unaware that my heart no longer belonged to the calm, predictable life we had built together. It was this change that caused me the most pain. I loved David. I always have. But every time I met Marcus and Jamal, I felt like I was falling apart. It didn't take long for things to escalate. I couldn't stop thinking about Marcus, and I couldn't stop feeling this constant pull of desire. It felt like every time I saw him, I was consumed. The gym, which was once a place for exercise, became a battlefield. My body longing to be near him, to feel his touch again. One afternoon, as I finished my workout, I noticed him standing next to the weight machines, watching me with a focus that made my heart race. "Hey," he said, coming closer. "I missed you last week." I felt my cheeks flush, and I swallowed, trying to keep my composure. "I've been busy lately," I said, smiling. But he didn't seem convinced. "Busy? Or avoiding me?" he asked, his voice warm and friendly. I looked away, not knowing how to respond. My heart was beating faster and faster. "I'm not avoiding you," I finally whispered, my voice barely audible. He smiled slightly, his body moving closer, his breath warm against my skin. "I don't think so," I replied, feeling a bit uneasy. And so, we found ourselves back at the start, caught up in this thrilling and captivating dance. That afternoon, he invited me to meet him again, just the two of us. The moment I agreed, I knew I was treading on uncharted territory, but I couldn't resist. When I arrived at his apartment, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. My hands trembled as I rang the doorbell. Marcus greeted me with a warm smile, but there was a depth in his eyes that suggested something more. He led me inside, into a quiet, intimate room. No music, no distractions, just us. "I think about you a lot," he whispered, his voice raspy. I try to keep my cool, reminding myself that I can't make this mistake. But the way he looks at me, the way he fills the room with his presence, it's impossible to stay level-headed. Before I know it, his lips are on mine again. This time, he doesn't test the waters. It's as if he can feel the uncontrollable fire inside me, and he's desperate for me. I can hear my heart beating as I kiss him back, and the world outside this moment disappears. I felt more alive than I had in years. Guilt and fear melted away, leaving me with a deep sense of connection and intimacy. There was just Marcus and our mutual desire for each other. Our kiss deepened, and I felt his hand on my waist, pulling me closer. His touch was a world of excitement, unlike anything I'd felt with David. He knew just how to touch me, how to make me feel like the only woman in the world. I couldn't control myself. I didn't want to, but I couldn't help myself that I was in a daze for the next few days. What started as casual encounters at the gym quickly turned into something more. We met more and more often, and the encounters became more and more intense. We found places to meet, quiet corners in the park, hidden corners in cafes. Every time we met, I felt like I was giving up a little bit more of myself. I felt a bit guilty, but I couldn't help but feel excited too. Then Jamal came into the picture. I was surprised by how quickly things developed between us. But one day, he caught me chatting with Marcus after a workout. There was no denying the chemistry between us, and I could feel Jamal's gaze on us. "I feel like I'm missing out," Jamal said playfully. "You two always seem so happy." I stopped talking. Did he see something? My heart raced, but Marcus just laughed and casually put his arm around my shoulder. "You're more than welcome to join us anytime," he said. I felt a wave of regret wash over me as soon as the words escaped my lips, and I felt a surge of panic. But Jamal just gave a cold smile. "Maybe I will," he added. From that moment on, things changed. Jamal started joining us more often. He showed up at the gym, always where Marcus and I were, and slowly, without warning, he became part of our dynamic. We hung out for the first time, and it was no big deal, just drinking at the bar, laughing, chatting casually. But I could feel the tension between us, the unspoken, unbreakable understanding that our relationship was something more than friendship. I knew I was walking a dangerous line point one night. After an especially intense gym session, Marcus sent me a text, "Come over to my place." I wasn't sure about it, but I really wanted to go. I drove to his apartment, thinking about what I was about to do. I told myself that this would be the last time, that I would finally end this madness. But when I walked in, the door closed behind me, and there was no turning back. Marcus was already there, but Jamal was too. I realized I had crossed a line, and it was all I could have ever imagined. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a precipice, looking down into the abyss I had created. They were both there, two men who knew how to make me feel seen and desired. David had never managed to do that. "Relax, Monica," Marcus whispered, his voice calm. "Tonight is all about you. Just relax." I did that night. I stepped into a dark place from which there was no return. After that night, it was as if I were carrying a heavy burden, suffocating under the weight of guilt. I couldn't shake this feeling. No matter how hard I tried to move past it, the truth remained, and it was there, haunting me. David, bless his heart, had no idea. He was clueless. I did my best to be the wife he deserved, always there to greet him when he came home, cooking dinner for him and listening to his boring jokes. But deep down, I was a different person. I felt like there were two sides to me, and I couldn't figure out how to bring them together. On one hand, there was the woman who had kissed Marcus and Jamal, and on the other, there was the woman who had sworn her love to David. It was a lot to process, and it came with a lot of guilt and paranoia. Every time David looks at me, I wonder if he can read something in my eyes. I can't shake this feeling that he knows something, but he never says a word. He's just the same as ever, still absorbed in his own daily business and still blind to the storm raging inside me. But Marcus and Jamal are different. They don't fit into the calm, predictable life I've built for myself. They don't fit into the neat box I've created for myself. They're the chaos I've invited into my world, and the storm feels stronger with every encounter. I'm always thinking about them, like Marcus's laugh, his easy confidence, and Jamal's focus and those sharp eyes that make me feel like I'm the only one who matters. It's a bit overwhelming to think about them both in the same room, but I can't stop thinking about it. I want them both, but I'm also caught in a web of lies. I go to the gym and try to act like everything's normal, and I smile at David when he asks me how my day was. But the truth is, I'm living two very different lives, and neither one of them is really me. The worst part wasn't the guilt, but the way I started to see David. I couldn't look at him without feeling ashamed. But he wasn't the problem. He hadn't done anything wrong. I had made him into something I wasn't passionate about. Now, with Marcus and Jamal, I'm living in a world that feels so much more alive and vibrant. But I knew it was also a dangerous world. One evening, as I sat on the sofa chatting with David, I felt like a stranger. He was watching TV, talking about his day at work, but all I could think about was the last time I was with Marcus and Jamal. David's voice broke in, and I turned around, surprised. He asked, his voice warm and comforting. I smiled warmly. Are you okay? He asked, frowning with concern. You've been distant lately, I stuttered. Had I been acting so obvious? I'm doing great, I said quickly, adding, just a little tired, I think. David nodded, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He didn't push me for answers, but I felt something had shifted in our relationship. We were drifting apart, and I was the one pushing him away. I felt guilty, but I couldn't shake it. I had lied to David and to Marcus and Jamal. They didn't deserve this. They were confident, strong men, perfectly capable of finding someone without the complications of marriage. But I couldn't let go. I knew they weren't looking for anything serious. It wasn't love, but a deep, powerful attraction to Marcus and Jamal that I couldn't resist. But the way they treated me made me feel valued for the first time in years. They saw me as someone who was wanted, desired, and powerful. But even as I felt this, I couldn't shake the idea that I was taking advantage of them, too. It made everything feel a bit off. One afternoon, as I was leaving the grocery store, I ran into Jamal. I hadn't seen either of them for a few days, and my stomach tightened at the sight of him. He smiled at me, that familiar smile, and I felt my pulse quicken. Monica, he whispered, his voice low and steady, as if he knew exactly what effect he had on me. It's good to see you, he said, his voice warm and comforting. You too, I replied, trying to sound casual, but failing. I was thinking, Jamal began, his voice almost playful, that maybe we could go out tonight, just the two of us. Marcus has something to do, but I'm free. I felt my heart beating faster, and my mind raced as I processed his offer. I don't know, I said, my voice quavering. I'm not sure, I added, my voice reflecting my inner conflict. He raised an eyebrow, clearly sensing my hesitation. Are you still worried about your husband? I swallowed hard, a wave of guilt washing over me. It's not that. I just... Jamal came closer, his eyes meeting mine. You know, Monica, you shouldn't just sit at home. You should go out and enjoy life. Don't let the guilt overwhelm you. My body froze, completely captivated by his warm gaze. In that moment, all the warnings and hints of guilt just disappeared. Okay, I whispered, finding my voice. I'll go, I added, trying to sound brave. That evening, I went to Jamal's apartment. As I stood there, I felt the weight of my choice pressing down on me. What was I doing? What had I become? But when the door opened, Jamal's warm smile greeted me, and I felt my worries melt away. We wasted no time. We were both ready for connection, and there was no need for any small talk. As our lips met, I felt the strong pull between us, his hands gently pulling me closer, his touch full of desire. There was no turning back. I felt a bit guilty, but it felt distant, like something that had happened to someone else, not me. It was my choice, my decision. In that moment, with Jamal, I felt more alive than I had in years. As I drove home that night, my mind was a million miles away. I couldn't stop shaking. What had I done? How could I possibly go on living a lie? David greeted me with a warm smile when I arrived, his eyes, usually so focused on his book, lifting to meet me. "You're home late," he said gently. "I had some things to do," I replied, my voice barely audible. He nodded, not saying a word, but I could tell he was aware of everything. I felt overwhelmed, guilty about my actions, and like I couldn't breathe. I knew I couldn't go on living like this. The question was, what was I going to do about it? The days that followed were like a fog, thick and disorienting, every moment merging into the next without clear boundaries. The guilt that had been gnawing at me flared up like a wildfire, consuming everything in its path. I couldn't sleep or concentrate. I couldn't explain why I felt overwhelmed by my actions. And yet, I found myself unable to stop. The world I had built with my own hands and lived in secret with Marcus and Jamal was beginning to crumble, and I was already too deep in to get out. David was starting to notice. I could see it in the way he looked at me, in the brief moments when our eyes met and he hesitated. He wasn't a fool, not really. I did my best to act like everything was okay, to keep up the facade of our perfect little world, but the cracks were beginning to show. The house felt colder, and the silence between us felt heavier. That evening, as I sat at the kitchen table pretending to sort through bills, David walked in. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, looking at me with a face that was, to me, like a book. "Monica," he said at last, his voice low, "we need to talk." My heart dropped into my stomach. "Okay," I whispered, my voice quavering. I could feel the weight of what was about to unfold. After all I'd done, I couldn't keep pretending forever. David sits across from me, his eyes fixed on mine as he tries to read the thoughts I am desperately trying to hide. "You've been distant for weeks," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I don't know what's going on with you, but I can feel it. Something's not right." I swallow hard, and I feel guilty, like I'm drowning in it. How could I possibly go on lying to him? How can I keep pretending? "David," I say, my voice cracking. He leans forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Is there someone else?" I freeze. His words hit me like a punch in the stomach. My chest tightens, and I take a sharp breath. I want to say everything's fine and that he's just being paranoid, but I can't. But I can't. But I can't do that anymore. I don't know what to say. I whisper, tears welling up in my eyes. David's face fell. I could see that he was hurt and didn't understand what was happening. He had always trusted me, always believed in us. I had broken that trust, and I knew it. I didn't want this, I continued, my voice barely audible. I never wanted this to happen, but it did. His hands were clenched into fists, and I could see the struggle in his eyes. He was trying to understand, to make sense of it all. Who? He asked, his voice low. Who were you seeing? I couldn't name them. It felt like betraying him and myself. I shook my head and remained silent. David sat back down, looking pale and pained. I trusted you, Monica. I thought we were happy. I never meant to hurt you, I said, my voice quivering. But I did. I can't take it back. I was in a daze for the next few hours. David didn't yell or cry. He was quiet, distant, and not himself. It was like he was trying to process the hurt I had caused. I couldn't blame him. What could he say to someone who had destroyed everything they had built together? That night, we didn't speak or touch. I lay next to him, heartbroken, knowing that whatever we had, whatever I had, was slipping away. With every breath, I could feel the distance growing between us. The next morning, things had changed. I woke up and David wasn't home. The bed was a mess, with only the left side of it untouched. For a moment, I let myself hope. Maybe he had gone to work early. Maybe we could just go on pretending for another day and everything would be fine. But when I found the note, reality hit me. It was short and sweet, written in his handwriting, and it really hit me hard. Monica, I can't do it anymore. I don't know what went wrong, but I can't go on living a lie. I need some space and time to think. Please respect my wishes. David. My hands trembled as I read the letter again. His words hit me hard. He was leaving. I knew it wasn't goodbye. Not yet, at least. But it felt like the beginning of the end. The days that followed felt like years. David didn't return my calls or respond to my messages. I told myself that it was only a temporary separation and that he would come back, that maybe we could still make it work. But deep down, I knew things were much more than that. During this time, Marcus and Jamal both reached out to me, and I'm so grateful for their support. They were worried and wanted to know what was going on. They could sense the change in me and how I was distancing myself from them. But I couldn't talk to them about David. I couldn't put into words the chaos that was swirling around me. Just when I thought I had this secret life under control, it all came crashing down. Marcus texted me first. "What's wrong, Monica? I don't like the way things are between us." I wanted to respond, to explain, but I couldn't. I couldn't face him, especially as I knew I'd gone too far. Jamal tried to call, but I didn't answer. I just couldn't face him, especially as I was falling apart. I felt so guilty, and I couldn't find any way to make it better. A week later, David came home. He looked tired, his eyes dull, but the clarity in his gaze broke my heart all over again. "Monica," he said gently, his voice steady but cold, "I think we need to talk." I nodded, my stomach doing a little flip-flop. "I know," he sighed, rubbing his temples. "I've been thinking about everything between us. I don't know what the future holds, but I can't go on living like this." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The words felt stuck in my throat. "I'm going to go away," he said, his voice barely audible. "I'm not sure when I'll be gone, but I need to take some time for myself. I think you do too. My chest tightened, and I felt the ground beneath my feet disappear. David had always been my rock, my safe haven, but now I had driven him away. I'm sorry, I whispered, tears finally falling. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant for this to happen. David didn't say anything more. He just stood up and walked out, leaving me alone in the silence of a house that no longer felt like home. I sat there, numb. The consequences of my actions were now real to me. The life I had built with David, the life I had promised to cherish, was slipping away. I had ruined everything for a short-lived passion, and now I had nothing. I was at a loss for what to do next. I didn't know how to fix things, but I knew one thing. I had crossed a line, and the consequences would have to be mine to bear. Thank you so much for listening to my story. This is the place to share my story of infidelity. Thank you so much for subscribing.